This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at the BBC, the most germy podcast you're going to download because...
I'm sorry.
Yes, everyone's poorly, apart from Bobby, who's a picture of health.
I am picture of health.
Anyway, some more dodgy stories coming up. Everyone needing forgiveness from the parish of Radio 2, Joe and Bobby in attendance.
Okay, so the first one, we have this week's confession collection, including Eddie's gristly mishap, We'll Meet Again, MEAT, of course.
Yes.
We have George's hairy biker tail. No, not them. This is Don't Go Breaking My Horn. And we have Johnny's story, Leave a Fright On For Me. And also a creepy confession from the Crypt.
But first, here's NG's confession. That's N and then a G. And this one's called The Life Boys of Summer. That's B-U-O-Y-S.
Please be seated.
Tonight's comes from NG. We just have the letters N and G.
Noel Gallagher has written a confession. Brilliant.
Could just be Simon and Joe and Bobby, it's time to confess. This goes back to my final year at senior school in Birmingham in July 1982. The school was in a suburb of Birmingham, very close to where J.R.R. Tolkien based his Lord of the Rings novels, near Sarehole Mill. There's a school show being put on in the East Wing Hall. I can't remember the production itself, but it meant that the entire hall was seated with all the chairs stacked up around the sides of the hall, below huge curtains. The hall was ready for its production for a whole week, and it started this very evening. It's the culmination for many, many people of several months of work. Well, at lunchtime we had a horrendous rainstorm that literally turned the sky so black it was like the middle of the night in the middle of the day. In the space of 30 minutes, enough rain fell to literally cause a waterfall from the upper playground next to the rugby pitches and bike sheds, down to the East Wing playground. The East Wing Hall, where the production was being located, was at the very lowest point of the school. And it was here that 2 feet of water had accumulated in an area the size of an average swimming pool. Now, we were in the East Foyer, and it sounded like the roof was coming in as the rain got even heavier. Next to the hall was a panicking teacher who called in and said, "Here, you lads." That sounded too much like a policeman, really, didn't it? "Hey, you lads, in here quickly now, please. I need your help." We were directed to one of the fire exits that had water seeping in between the door and the frame edges. We were made to form a line to get sandbags dropped around the edges of the door and build them up to stop the ingress of water. It was going okay, water was seeping in, but we were keeping the now 3-foot deep torrent on the other side of the door from breaking in as all 4 of us were pushing against the fire doors. Serious and important work. However, 2 of us, myself included, realised that we could very easily, if no one was looking, simply pull away a couple of the bags and just let the floodgates or the fire exit doors open, and that would be quite cool because it would be like something out of Towering Inferno without a fire. Well, we just thought it had to be done, and we weren't going to let this opportunity pass. So we looked at each other, checked that no one could see us, smiled and pulled the sandbags away and said things like, "Oh dear." There's a surprise. Let me tell you, Simon, Joe and Bobby, the East Hall became a torrent. The floor was instantly under a couple of feet of water. Next casualty was the school's East Wing prize grand piano by the stage, under several feet of water to our great amusement. By now the East Wing corridor was underwater and the school's East Wing was in a state of evacuation. Chaos engulfed the school. Well, the aftermath was like a hotel after the Who's legendary Keith Moon had stayed there and played his famous tricks with waterbeds and cherry bombs. Specific reference which you might have to look up. We were quite proud of the results and very amused by the whole thing. To this day, the flood was blamed on a freak rainfall and the entire production, which I told you about, was cancelled. The floor eventually dried out. I've no idea what happened to the prize piano or what was under the stage. It was ruined, whatever it was. And the 5th year in the West Block, we didn't know what happened because we were moved to the 5th year in the West Block after this happened, and that block was like something out of Harry Potter. It was so old. What clearly, says NG, or Ng. I'm asking for forgiveness as myself and the 3 mates, one of whom emigrated subsequently, could have stopped this flooding if we'd actually stayed at the door and done as we were told. Staff and pupils who were involved in the production had endless work to do cleaning up and drying out things and rearranging everything, but it did enforce teamwork, so it was a good lesson for all involved. So I think maybe I helped in their education by contributing to that. Says a rather desperate NG who caused flooding in a school and the cancellation for a few days at least of the big production, which by his own admission many people had worked on for many months. Joe's going to be stern, I imagine.
Not stern as Bobby. Did you hear those sighs? So in my head, this is Noel Gallagher. It's Liam probably as well helping, and then maybe Serge and Tom from Kasabian if he's got 3 mates. That's what I think is happening, and it's not, is it?
Who knows? I don't know. I have got the original email somewhere. But basically, they let the floodwater in and they ruin the play.
But you can't forgive something like this. You cannot. I mean, there are mischief makers, which is okay, but then there's something like this which has, really bad repercussions. That poor piano and the chaos that it caused. So no, I'm not going to forgive. Mainly because Bobby would give me a hard time.
If you ever worked on a school play or something like that, I used to do the sound effects for the school play.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. If somebody ruined it just for the heck of it, like NG. Schools are ruined by people, NG. I don't like people like NG.
No.
What do you say, Bobby?
Did a bad thing.
What do you expect me to say? You had one job, you had a choice. It was really simple. You could have saved the day. You didn't. You ruined it for everybody and let yourselves down. What did you really expect a forgiveness from any of us? You are not forgiven.
So do you think NG's just showing off and not expecting anything?
I don't know. Actually, I am unsure because there doesn't seem much regret, does there?
None at all.
That's the really sad thing. So, no, you are not forgiven, NG.
The Confessions Podcast.
This comes from Eddie. Thank you, Eddie. To the awarders of absolution, the purveyors of penance, and the inquisition of indulgences. This happened when I was about 16. That awkward age when you're not yet a fully grown adult, but certainly not a child. I had somehow managed to get myself my first serious girlfriend, and I was duly invited for the traditional post-church Sunday roast. Lunch guests included my girlfriend's 2 sisters, who were 11 and 4, and Grandma and Grandad and her mum and dad. So there I found myself, squashed around the family dining table, my conversational skills weak, and my plan was to stay quiet so as not to embarrass myself too much. Thankfully, I had my girlfriend on one side and her lovely 4-year-old sister Judy on the other, so I felt safe. I thought I might just survive as long as I didn't spill anything down my front and I wasn't called on to contribute anything substantial to the conversation. I had eaten every day of my life with minimal problems, obviously, but as I found myself surrounded by adults I had nothing in common with, I grew very self-conscious. Was I using my cutlery correctly? Was I taking too much food? Was I offering enough polite chit-chat? They had served beef, which I really wasn't keen on, and my sizable portion was particularly gristly.
Worst word in the English language.
Is it?
Yes.
Is it worse than nostril?
Yes, gristly.
The first mouthful was impenetrable, and having chewed it around my mouth for an age, I ended up having to swallow it whole. Oh, God! Hoping I wouldn't choke. As the meal progressed, I was having to cut away larger and larger sections of fat and rind. Sorry, Bobby, I know you're struggling here.
It's all right.
As a vegetarian as opposed to vegetable. To my growing horror, I watched as everyone else's plates emptied, but my plate had an increasing pile of rejected, disgusting offcuts. I feared the family would be offended. Once I'd eaten as much as I could stomach, I placed my knife and fork over the remains in an attempt to hide my leftovers. After an age, my girlfriend's mother eventually realised that everyone had stopped eating and that it was time to clear the table. I saw my opportunity, hoping to simultaneously hide the evidence of my fussy food habits, whilst also giving the illusion that I was a helpful, decent potential son-in-law-to-be. Blimey, forward-thinking at 16. I quickly began clearing the gristle from my plate onto the plate next to mine, which happened to be little Judy's, age 4. She was the only other person around the table who hadn't finished all of her food either.
Oh, I've got a really horrible feeling about this.
Just as I began to think I'd got away with my indiscretion, my girlfriend's mother suddenly pointed out that there was a lot of food left on Judy's plate, to which the answer was yes, the stuff she'd left and all of my leftovers. She hadn't spotted I'd already begun clearing the plates. To my horror, she said, Judy, it doesn't look like you've eaten very much. Could you finish your food, please? No! There are many, many starving people in the world. That odd line. Time froze. I broke into a sweat. Surely one of the other relatives had seen what I'd done and that 3/4 of her leftovers were mine. I thought someone would say something, but no one did. Were they being polite? Were they waiting for me to say something? I couldn't explain that it was all my food. The mother was clearly disappointed at how much had been left by her daughter. How could I say that I'd found most of the meal inedible, disgusting and gristly and spit-outable? If I'd owned up, would she force me to eat more? Would I have to sit there and chew my way through the remaining gristle, fat gristle and rind? Good name for a band. Until she was satisfied. I thought Judy would object, but she didn't say a word. She was only 4. Maybe she hadn't seen her. She hadn't realised how much she'd left. Anyway, words failed me and I choked again. What felt like hours to me were probably only a few seconds to everyone else. There is something particularly horrible about beef gristle. Anyway, horrified, I watched this lovely little girl struggle to cut up and chew her way through my mountain of rejected gristle and fat as the family looked on. Nice tea time tale, Simon. The whole time I wondered if someone else around the table had spotted what I'd done. After many minutes of poor Judy struggling her way through my offcuts of fat, the mother decided she'd seen enough and we cleared away the plates. I was even quieter during the dessert than I was for the main. I couldn't look anyone in the eye. I said, "Thanks for the lovely meal." I made a swift exit. I never confessed to my girlfriend or her family, even though the relationship lasted a year afterwards. So I asked for forgiveness, not from the family whose observation skills were clearly somewhat lacking, nor from my then girlfriend whose affections were responsible for leading me there in the first place, but from the unsuspecting 4-year-old little Judy, who was the victim of a teenager's awkward inability to deal with social situations and his hatred of beef with gristle. That unchewable bit which we've all...
You've used up your quota of that word.
All
Stop
right,
it now.
Joe goes
Stop
next.
it now. I know about teenagers. I know about social anxieties. I don't particularly like eating in front of people, so I know that kind of thing when you feel really, really self-conscious. However, this was a 4-year-old child that you made eat gristle, so I cannot forgive you for this. Not no way, not no how. It was a terrible thing. You should have spoken up.
It's looking bad, Eddie. Let's check in with Bobby.
I think it's interesting, Eddie, that you got all the gristle, it seems. So I wondered whether there was something going on before that you did not know about. And that mum gave you the gristle on purpose. What she didn't see is it offloaded onto little Judy. So I think there was definitely something going on.
She was saying, get out and leave my daughter
I think
alone.
she said, you're not good enough. So here's the fatty bit. I think you're right, you're not forgiven. That poor little girl. And the very fact that she just kept on going, poor kid, not forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Eddie's confession. We'll meet again, where he dumped his unwanted, and it pains me to say this word so many times, gristle,
I love it,
onto a poor 4-year-old child's plate.
And
Judy, wasn't it? It was Judy,
yeah,
that's right.
And Eddie's confession did spark many listeners to write in with assorted dinner disasters.
Mel in Gloucester. My mum is an amazing cook, but she used to make a very dodgy beef casserole. Every week, he says, Mel says, I would dread the chewy bits, and as if the post-beef anxiety wasn't enough, the during eating stage made me break out in sweat and fear. There is a certain, sweat, isn't that when you're eating a bit of gristle? I was too terrified to continue the 10-minute chew per piece. I'd end up sneaking off to the toilet to spit it into some tissue. To this day, beef anxiety remains.
If Bob Harris was here, he'd remember an old prog band called Throbbing Gristle.
Yeah.
We should. Do you think we should? No, apparently we won't be playing any. They're not on the playlist at the moment.
No,
they're not on the playlist.
I wonder if they ever have been on the Radio 2 playlist. I doubt very
However,
much.
as an exclusive for the Confessions podcast,
Go on.
ladies and gentlemen, Throbbing Gristle.
Is that the Mighty Boosh? Cosmic, baby.
Yeah. Now, as you know, that's from 1980. It's the B-side of their single Adrenaline, and that was called Distant Dreams Part 2. What do you think?
It's great. I can absolutely see where the Mighty Boosh got some of their inspiration from when it comes to their music.
Very good. I would say, I think one of the reasons why that gristle confession worked is because everybody related instantly to what that feels like when you've got a bit of... when was the last bit of meat you ate?
Well, I ate by accident. Someone made a mince chili, and I ate it thinking it was veggie. There you go, and that was a bit gristly.
Yuck.
is a horrible feeling.
I get raisin sweats, not meat sweats. But
This doesn't make sense to me.
it does.
Raisin sweats. So
Because raisins are so vile and so disgusting and so horrible when you squeeze them in your mouth. I once was doing some work experience and was given these scones that somebody there at this occupational therapy unit had made, and I had to eat them because they were there in front of me, and obviously I was there doing work experience, and I literally went into the toilet afterwards and was sick, really sick, but I had the sweats because I had to eat these raisins.
what about if it's in a nice flapjack or something
Or
like that?
chocolate raisins.
Pick them
No.
out. No.
Did you have a bad experience with a raisin when you were young?
Always hated them.
What about grapes?
just- Grapes are okay because they're big and juicy, but raisins are just, as I've said before, blue bottles. You're just always worried you're going to crunch on a little leg or two.
I can. I remember a box of breakfast cereal and there was a wasp in it, and ever since that day, even when I go now, I see that breakfast cereal and I go, no, wasps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
Anyway, that may well have sparked a thought for a future confession. If you got one, it's confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Still to come, we'll find out which confession caused one innocent bystander to flee the scene like something out of a Fast and Furious film.
Overtook on an empty opposite side of the road, he shot through a red light like a bat out of hell. He also accidentally cut up a police car by jumping the traffic lights, and the Blues and Twos swiftly followed him in hot pursuit. That got pretty heated towards the end. Honesty is the best policy. You'll hear that in a bit. Right, parish notice board time. Joe, what have you got?
I've got an email from 13-year-old James. Hello, James. Hi, Bobby, Joe, Simon and Joe. I just thought I'd put myself in there
Bobby, Joe, Simon and Joe. That's good.
Just more of me, really.
Does it say Bobby, Joe, Simon, Joe and Simon? And Bobby.
And Bobby. Hello, Bobby, Simon and Joe. I love the Confessions podcast and started listening to it around Christmas last year. I've downloaded all the podcasts available and usually listen in the car with my mum on our drives to and from my boarding school. You'll be pleased to hear that I have rated you on iTunes 5 stars, of course.
Thank you.
But the reason I'm writing in is because I've been bugging my mum to write a confession for ages and hoping she has, but to no avail. I know she has a lot of things to confess, as she's told me many of the things that she's done in the past. For example, setting off the fire alarm to get the firemen round, just so that my
Really?
mum and her friends could see them. Really?
That's wrong.
That's not good.
Yeah, Q's stern face, Bobby.
Yeah.
I can see that face. So I hope by her hearing this, it will encourage her to send one in.
Do you know, I'm not sure that would that get broadcast? Would we be allowed to do that? Would a producer, any sort of upstanding producer, would say that would be like wasting the emergency services time?
Yeah, we couldn't possibly do that, I don't think.
So we
It's
can't
not
do-
allowed.
unless we read it out and then we're very
Very stern.
very stern about it.
Which we're being now.
Thank you very much, Lee, for that. Bobby, what have you got?
And this email comes from Jotty in Ashford in Kent. Dear Simon, Joe and the ever-forgiving Bobby, I was introduced to your wonderful and hilarious confessions by my wonderful and patient mum, Christine. She and I would spend our 20-minute journey home from work in utter hysterics, and I often wondered how my mum managed to steer the car on our journey home, as we regularly would be crying with laughter. I moved away from home in November last year, so my mum and I are no longer able to listen to the confessions together. But I've now discovered the podcast. Would it be possible for my mum and I to receive any BBC Radio tat that you might have lying around the studio? Something for her as she introduced me to you, and something for me as I have shown her how she can catch up with the week's confessions using her computer. I am also spreading the word in my workplace, a local hospital where I am a medical secretary, in the hope that I might encourage someone to sign up. Thanks in advance for the ever-devoted listener.
We've got quite a lot of people confessing on behalf of family members on the podcast this week, and we do have this. The sound of a ready-to mug being scraped across the Formica. This really isn't tat, is it? It's like a...
I think it's a design classic is what I'd call this.
Also, I think it's the thing, if you put it in the works dishwasher, it may not be there in the morning, so I think you should take it home and wash it.
It's a white
That's
mug.
how desirable these are.
It says BBC Radio 2, bit of orange, bit of white. It's probably porcelain, would you say?
I think it's the finest porcelain.
Do you think?
Yeah, I reckon. I'm sure I've seen these in a very posh London store
How hard
for
would it
about
have
£1
to
million
be
pounds.
Let's not do that.
before I break it?
No, don't. Because that's Ken Bruce's top, and he might get little bit things of he might get little bits of things in his feet.
He doesn't broadcast bare feet. That's Joe Wiley who does
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Ken's got hooves, he hasn't got feet.
Well, there's a thought. So I got this from Caroline, Simon, Joe and Bobby and Joe. Fair warning, this email is a shameless ploy for some Radio 2 tat. I listen to the Confessions podcast on a Saturday morning, and every time I listen, I have the same two thoughts. One, I must be the most boring person on the planet because I don't have any stories to tell. And 2, that the same can't be said for my mum Linda. She could fill a whole podcast on her own. For example, there was the time when she worked with 2 nice women. Let's call them Jane and Sue. My mum knew that Jane had a fear of artificial limbs. So she sourced an artificial leg, and one day she asked Jane if she'd make her a cup of tea. Being the nice woman she was, Jane happily obliged. In the kitchen, Jane opened the fridge to find the artificial leg sitting next to the bottle of milk and covered in ketchup.
Who does that?
She screamed while Sue killed herself laughing.
That's the thing. Only friends could do that. Only really, really good friends could do that to each other.
This is just one of the many stories from my mum's life that's radio-friendly to broadcast, and I hope it was sufficiently entertaining to warrant some tat. Caroline, thanks. We'll send you something.
Remember, if you want to get in touch with the podcast, if you have your own confession that's comparable with that, or one that will make you laugh out loud and anybody else laugh out loud, or you've just managed to sneakily subscribe your mates to the podcast and you want to boast, all you have to do is email confessions@bbc.co.uk.
OK, grubby part of the notice board, although it's been less grubby recently. I think, let's see how we're doing this week. It's the non-compliant confessions that we've received this week. Joe's going first.
Ali got in touch to beg forgiveness for staying in his girlfriend's room and using a small, teeny tiny jug they found as a toilet after a night of heavy drinking.
Oh dear.
His apology came far too late for the girlfriend's sister, however, who went out wearing an outfit she'd unwittingly steamed using the jug's contents, much to all of her friends' revulsion.
Didn't she recognise the smell?
I've read one of those out in the past. There's a new dictatorial regime in place. Tom sent us some pretty graphic detail about his wife giving birth outside a petrol station. And he rang his poor parents as it was happening in the middle of the night and then cut them off and failed to tell them whether his wife and child were actually okay. Your wife gets extra sympathy, Tom, for having to listen to you retell your birthing story over and over in the years since it happened. See, that would have been fine, but for some reason you've been censored, Tom.
Definitely no forgiveness for Graham, who got in touch to tell us about an incident which occurred when he was trying to get a picture of Sir Ian Beefy Botham walking from John O'Groats to Land's End. It involves his boss's camera, his friend Mark's bare bottom, Graham's thumb, and an oblivious Beefy in the foreground, which is very naughty.
Some cheeks you don't need to know about.
No.
Yes, and what was the thumb doing? Anyway.
Just to be clear, none of these are okay, but please, obviously, do send us your confessions. But just ask, will you be able to look anyone in the eye afterwards? Just consider that, and then send away confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Let's head back to the compliant confessions then, and here comes Johnny's Halloween tale, Leave a Fright On For Me.
The Confessions Podcast.
This is Radio 2 with another confession here, which comes from Johnny in County Durham, and it's slightly scary. In a kind of a moderate kind of sense. Johnny says, Simon, Joe, and the beatific Bobby.
What does that mean?
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Saintly.
Aww.
Gorgeous.
He hasn't seen me.
Radiant.
All of those. I'm just Simon, she's just Joe, you're the beautiful Bobby.
That's right, Johnny.
Already forgiven.
No offence taken.
As a long-time confessions disciple, I have been considering an unburdening for some years, and now that my son Sam, the subject of this tale, is getting married, I think it's about time to reveal all and seek penance. It's the mid-90s. One midweek evening, it's getting dark. Clocks have gone back. Sam's around 10 years old and a very keen Cub Scout in our local village. I, says Johnny, am a keen DIYer, and if I say so myself, I used the time that he was out with the troop to crack on with some jobs. I just built, even though I say so myself, I'd missed the outline, a lovely stone porch on the side of the house with a new back door. It was nearly finished, and I was inside the house busy laying floor tiles in a rather intricate pattern, which absorbed most of my concentration. This particular evening, close to Halloween, was dark, it was overcast, so it makes it really, really dark. And as I worked alone, grouting by the light of a lonely lamp, I heard Sam make his way up the path. Knowing that this opportunity wouldn't come along again, I acted on impulse to provide a seasonal scare for young Sam, age 10. Before he rounded the corner, I crouched down behind the door, switched the light off. Just before he arrived at the porch, I reached up and seized the door handle, holding it firm. Keeping the handle in the closed position, I waited for him to try and get in, already starting to snigger to myself. 2 last footsteps and then a grasp of the handle. He turned it, he pushed it, he tried to get it open. One very confused child, not only unable to open the door, but unable even to pull the handle down, is starting to get a bit upset. But expecting puzzlement, confusion, and even anger, what I actually got was I sensed rising fright on the other side of the door as he knocked louder and louder, wondering why no one was in, wondering why he couldn't open the door, what had gone wrong. The shouts of alarm became increasingly urgent as the darkness took on a more sinister aspect. If only I'd thought about hiring a dry ice machine, says Johnny. There's interesting fathering technique here, Johnny. Meanwhile, the other side of the door, I crouched in silence, trying to suppress my giggles as much as possible. I ask you, what was a responsible father to do? Of course, just as my...
Sorry.
Thank you. No, that was quite scary. Just as the panic from my son reached a crescendo, I reached out and put my hand through the cat flap and grasped his leg and pulled. I think I also might have shrieked like a maniac. To this day, I can still hear his screams. He tripped, he scrambled, he fell, he ran, he scrambled and fell and tripped again. Nothing I could do. Tears streaming down my face, curled up in a corner with laughter. What a great dad I am. Eventually, I pulled myself together, turned on all the lights, opened the door, and I set off to find him. And I found him, eventually, stood in the corner of our garden, kind of crying, kind of shivering with fear, but with increasingly, reassuringly, the realisation that the scene was dad-made and not the result of some ankle-grabbing goblin. Because that was the sound I was trying to go for. So whose forgiveness do I seek? Well, not, I think, from Sam, because we've had years of laughter over this, but perhaps from his wife-to-be, Martha, or any future grandchildren, because that wicked sense of humour has been passed on down the generational line. I fall at your feet, begging forgiveness, but not expecting it. Anyway, Johnny in County Durham, interesting kind of parent that would do that kind of thing. That thinks a 10-year-old can be spooked in an appropriate way. Johnny's confession now judged by young Joe.
Well, I wasn't going to forgive at all because I thought it was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to do to your child. But it sounds like this is their family. This is where their family rolls. This is the kind of thing that they do. So
sorry about that. There was a ghost in the machine, to quote the police.
I can't talk now.
So it's their family, it's the way they roll, and they muck around a lot, and they've had a lot of fun.
They've got a great sense of humour, and obviously, it's ingrained in his son now, so I think it's absolutely fine. I will forgive. I like this family.
Bobby.
I loved it. It's such a great story. The suspense you build up, they're sitting there thinking, oh, what's this? And then suddenly it turns into something more serious, and the panic builds, and it's brilliant, and all the tension's there, and you grab his leg, and it's hilarious because he is terrified, and it would be fabulous if he was 16, but he's 10. So, Johnny, no, you don't do that to a 10-year-old. That is awful.
You're so harsh.
You are not forgiven.
Nicely done.
The Confessions Podcast.
George says, Father Simon, Joe and Bobby, back in the early 70s, when I was a much younger man, I had an old Ford Escort. I think it's a Ford 1100L Mark I, a two-door saloon. Bobby will probably know all about this. Do you know all about that?
I'm not. It's not that I'm not a fan. Never had one, but my dad had an estate version.
Okay, so that's enough of that. I was driving it through. I was driving it through Lincoln one day when the car developed an interesting fault. Every time I put my foot on the brakes, my horn blasted at full volume. Now, as you can imagine, this caused quite a stir. It was, in fact, extremely embarrassing. It was impossible to drive normally without causing a scene. Brake, honk, accelerate, brake, honk, accelerate. And so it went on. Each honk lasted about 5 or 6 seconds, and sometimes it came in bursts of 3 or 4 honks altogether. I knew enough about cars that I could actually remove an engine easy peasy, but I couldn't work out what was wrong on this particular day, and there was no Google on your mobile back then. I did later find out it was due to bad wiring, but at that point I couldn't understand what was causing the problem. Since I was only a mile away from home when the fault developed, I thought it'd be best to just get home. I figured I'd sort it out when I got back. I would slip into my scruffy work bell-bottoms and tie-dye shirt, and then I'd check it all out. However, there's a nice little period piece. However, the problem was that whoever had relaxing work bell-bottoms anyway in the first place, you can't work in bell-bottoms.
No, and they're quite tight at the top, aren't they? And then they swing out.
They're good for catching oil, maybe.
Okay, anyway, the problem was that there's a railway track running through Lincoln town centre, and it crossed the road that I was on. When I got there, the barrier was down. I was young and foolish, and I admit I was coming up to it slightly faster than I should have been, so therefore I had to brake very hard. That was bad enough. But you can imagine the loud, extraordinary series of beeps that the car made and how it startled everyone in the vicinity, because the sound gave the impression that I was a maniac at the wheel, and the most annoyed, impatient maniac at that. Maybe all maniacs are impatient, but this one certainly sounded it. At the barrier sat 20 heavy-set bikers. Not the hairy bikers who are later, but 20 heavy-set bikers. These are 1970s bikers, remember, complete with leathers, German army tin helmets, and lots of tattoos. Thankfully, I was a couple of cars back from them, but all heads turned towards me as the last of the blast echoed around the buildings. Some of the bikers got off their bikes and began stomping angrily towards me. When they were halfway between their bikes and me, the barrier lifted, but they kept on walking, and I panicked. I quickly wound down my window, stuck my head out, turned towards the car behind and shouted, "What's the matter with you? Leave your horn alone! You're sounding very impatient. A horn should not be sounded when stationary on a road at any time, other than at times of danger due to another vehicle being on or near the road. Highway code, everybody knows that." Anyway, as I turned back, the bikers reached me. I shook my head at them in consensus with their obvious irritation. I smiled and tutted, "Some people don't know their highway code, do they, bikers? Some people have no patience." And I'm pointing my thumb at the car behind. Anyway, the poor 10-stone bespectacled weakling sat behind me had no idea what and why the bikers were heading for him. But he panicked and he put his car in gear, overtook on an empty opposite side of the road, and only just missing the bikers heading for him, managed to get over the crossing unscathed. However, at that point, he shot through a red light like a bat out of hell, and then got pursued by some of the bikers. He also accidentally cut up a police car by jumping the traffic lights, and the blues and twos swiftly followed him in hot pursuit. I lost sight of the convoy as it disappeared over a bridge, so I actually don't know what happened, I'm afraid. However, the reason for this confession, says George, is that if you were that poor fellow, the 10-stone weakling in the car behind me, I apologise for pointing that the Hells Angels should come and have a word with you. And I seek forgiveness from the Confessional Collective. But also, really, says George, ask yourself honestly, what would you have done in my position? Well, he's throwing out an extra question. Okay, Joe's got an answer.
Leaps to the microphone. I would have just said, "I'm sorry, there's a fault with my car. It just keeps making a really weird honking noise every time I touch the brake." Bobby?
What exactly, George? The word was no, you big idiot. Also, those 20 guys on the bike would probably have to fix it by the side of the road. They'd have held the car up themselves, got underneath, looked at the dodgy wire and gone, "Fixed it for you, mate." So again, assuming that someone was in trouble, that's another thing. So
it doesn't
George,
sound as though those bikers were there to... I'm sure, obviously these are the 70s bikers and things have changed and everything else.
Had he explained and passing that on to someone else? And so, George, no.
He sounds rather pathetic, if you ask me. A feeble individual.
You think?
They can't possibly be forgiven.
So, George, not only are you not forgiven, you're also feeble and slightly pathetic.
The Confessions Podcast.
A confession there from George, which we called "Don't Go Breaking My Horn." Steve, on the People's Verdict, confessed to his own horny prank. That's car horn. A car horn prank. A favourite trick of mine was to wire the horn to the reversing light switch of my friends' cars at uni, with hilarious consequences. It took them ages to put 2 and 2 together.
Don't try that at home, kids. I thought that was rather fine.
It was funny.
It was very good, and a fault on a car that I've never come across before. Bobby's our car expert, really, aren't you?
Not really the expert. I know some stuff. That's it, really.
Foot on the brake, firing the horn. Very good. That's it from this week's batch of confessions. But the podcast fun isn't over yet. That's what it says here. Because we got a confession from the Crypt.
Yeah, this one's been requested by Peter Clark, who says, "Father Simon, Joe, Bobby and the collective. The confession that I'm requesting is from several years ago. My recollection, and I've retold this confession to many people because it struck me as a hilarious prank. It's the story about one brother asking forgiveness from his younger brother. It had something to do with the Exorcist film and one of the brothers being clearly disturbed by it. This confession struck me as one of the classics, and I think your listeners and the panel would enjoy hearing it again. I hope you can find it. Keep up the good work. Keep the confessions coming. It's something to look forward to on the journey home from work. Many thanks, Peter."
Well, Peter, we've pulled it out of the dusty archives. The confession was sent in by an anonymous listener that referred to himself as the evil brother of death from hell. Here it is. It's called Brotherly Love.
The Confessions Podcast.
Confession music is on, and this from... Well, it's signed the evil brother of death from hell.
Present?
Yes.
I don't hold out much hope, really.
No, absolutely. Guilty as charged then.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Lee, for this email, Evil Brother of Death from Hell. Dear Father, Mother and Children, which makes me feel rather strange. My story goes back to the early 70s. I was an 18-year-old student living at home with my mum, dad and 15-year-old brother. One evening I invited my brother to the cinema to see the film of the moment, which was The Exorcist. I should say at this point, of course, The Exorcist was an 18. Therefore, taking your 15-year-old brother was an unwise thing.
Highly illegal.
Yes. Anyway, off we went. Did I do that all right? Yeah, okay. Off we went, got our seats and settled down to enjoy the film. Anyway, during the scarier bits, I could see from the corner of my eye that my brother was covering his, and he was clearly really, really spooked. When we got home, my folks asked about the film, and my brother tried to make out that it wasn't that frightening. So we all retired to bed. In the middle of the night, I got up to go to the loo, and I could see my brother unusually had left his door ajar and the bedside light on. So I thought I would put his fear to the test. Looking around the bathroom, I noticed my mum's face pack and mascara. I applied loads and loads of it to my face, waiting a few minutes for the face pack to dry. Then, grinning hard so the face pack would crack, I checked my reflection, and I have to say I did look pretty evil. Adding some of my dad's Brill cream to my longish hair to spike it out, I did look like Linda Blair in the head-spinning scene. If you've seen The Exorcist, which I haven't, but does that sound about right?
Right,
Imagine,
yes,
yeah.
very good.
I left the bathroom and quietly crawled under my brother's bed and turned onto my back. I then started banging the bed up and down as hard and fast as I could muster. My brother shot bolt upright and yelled, "What's going on?" or words to that effect. At that moment I appeared, head only, from under the bed. Again, grinning maniacally, maniacally, and that as well. There was a missing A, but I didn't notice. At my, by now, hysterical brother, who then leapt out of bed, got to the bottom of the stairs without touching a single step, and straight out of the front door into the night, dressed only in his string vest and underpants. It was the 70s. He sprinted towards the high street at full tilt. I should add here that he was quite a big lad who played rugby on the wing for his school, but that night he would have been picked for England if the selectors had been watching. By now my parents were out of bed demanding to know what was going on, and I quickly explained the situation. So my father and myself started to run after my brother, and we were joined by a number of our neighbours who were woken by the commotion, thinking they were chasing a burglar. Neighbours did that in those days, Simon, so the sight of 5 middle-aged men dressed in various tartan dressing gowns and slippers running down the high street in the dead of night after a screaming youth was a sight to behold. The most surreal version, and vision even, was Mr. Prendergast, who joined the chase riding his 10-year-old son's push bike whilst wearing his wife's flowery nightie and pom-pom slippers. We finally managed to stop my brother at the station, come clean and calm him down. To this day, he still hasn't forgiven me, but I would like to ask forgiveness from the residents of this suburban town whose sleep was disturbed by my silly antics. Thank you, the evil brother of Death from Hell, who really, quite astonishing story. I mean, a pretty good trick, but then to end up with a sort of a Benny Hill chase through the middle of this town was something else altogether. Let's see what Sister Rebecca makes.
There's a fantastic slapstick quality to that story. You can just imagine the scene. I'm pretty torn with this one because we all do horrible things to our siblings, and also what he did was very imaginative. I mean, dressing up with a face pack and cracking it and putting the lipstick on.
Yeah, but
good on him,
thing
really.
To do.
Very horrible thing to do.
And had taken his 15-year-old
and yet his brother
brother
was 15. You know, he's not that young, and the brother had pretended it wasn't scary. I don't know. I think I'm going to forgive him.
You are going to forgive. I just like the idea of all the neighbours thinking they were chasing a burglar. What do you have, Mother Superior?
Oh, gosh, yes, this is a tricky one. The evil brother of Death from Hell.
Yes.
18 years old. I mean, it's tempting, isn't it? I would have been tempted to have done the same. But my brothers used to play evil tricks on me all the time, and I don't think I've suffered any long-term... Or maybe I have. I don't know.
What do they do?
Well, they used to
shut me in cupboards and cut my teddy bear up and frighten me and all that. But anyway,
Fair enough.
If we played cowboys and Indians, I was always the first one to get shot. But anyway, it is tricky, this one. I would say on the whole, you evil brother of death from hell, you're forgiven, but don't do it again.
Brother Matthew.
I do remember going to see Blair Witch Project in the cinema and going to the loos in the cinema afterwards and being obviously in the loo. And
you went to the loo and then you were in the loo?
I was obviously at the loo.
Yes.
And it was packed out, this loo, and somebody suddenly turned all the lights off and went, "Woo!" And the number of screams from a men's loo I have never heard since. I think I'm going to forgive, because a huge amount of imagination went into this, and I even like the name, Evil Brother of Death from Hell.
It's pretty
superb.
good.
Well done.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that was your confession from the Crypt this week, which was called Brotherly Love.
Very timely as well, what with the date and everything. But
Yes, because we're recording this on Halloween. But it's an example of the kind of thing that brothers and sisters do to each other. But if you did to a friend or something, that would be it.
I also think it's just one step too far. Actually, wasn't very funny.
Do you
in the end.
really?
Yeah, I think
So protective.
being that scared, you could. I just wouldn't speak to my brother again.
Funny image, though, chasing down the street.
Extremely brilliant visual.
If you have a confession that made you belly laugh all the way home, then send in all the details to confessions@bbc.co.uk. We really do want to hear them, and we'll do our best to dig them out from the Crypt. It's the same email address should you feel the need to unburden your guilty conscience. Salvation is just a click away.
If you made it to the end of the last podcast, we asked you to tweet the phrase bevy of beseechers. Thanks to Ed, Luke, Neris and all the others who did that. This week's code phrase is going to be decided by Joe.
Well, I know what you're going to want to go for.
Yeah, but it's entirely your choice.
Okay, fat, that word, and rind.
Do you mean fat, gristle and rind?
Yes.
It's like shake, rattle and roll,
Yeah,
isn't it? It has the same
same
feel
rhythm.
to it. Okay, it's fat, gristle and rind. Thank you very much.
If you have something to get off your chest, do unburden yourself and send your See Me story to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
And subscribe to the Confessions podcast on the BBC Sounds app, and you can hear the show Monday to Friday, 5 o'clock on Radio 2. So thank you very much indeed for downloading this little podcast. Thank you. Goodbye.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.